Section 1. Setting the stage. The year was 1892. In the heart of Hindustan, where the sun rose over red-tiled rooftops and painted the narrow lanes in shades of gold, life moved to the rhythm of the bazaar. The scent of cardamom and turmeric hung in the air, carried by the breeze from spice stalls. Temple bells chimed softly in the distance, while a muezzin's call to prayer floated over the rooftops. And then, cutting through the sounds of the land, came the sharp clop-clop of polished leather boots on cobblestone. It was the sound everyone recognized. The British were walking through. The bazaar was crowded that morning. Merchants in loose cotton cordas called out their prices, balancing trays of fruit, bolts of fabric, or jars of honey. Women in bright saris bargained over vegetables. Children darted between stalls with laughter. But whenever a British officer passed, the mood shifted slightly. Voices lowered, postures stiffened. The British presence was not violent that day, but it was heavy, like a shadow that dimmed the sunlight without blocking it entirely. Among the stalls, there stood a small wooden shop. Its signboard read in careful, looping Urdu script, Amir and Sons, calligraphy and decorative boards. Inside, bent over a broad wooden table, sat Amir. His fingers were stained with deep indigo and gold paint. His tools, fine-tipped brushes, carved bamboo pens, jars of pigment, were laid out neatly in rows. Every stroke he painted was deliberate, as though each letter carried a heartbeat. For 20 years, Amir had made shop signs, marriage invitations, and festival banners. He was known in the town not just for his skill, but for the way he spoke, soft and measured, never raising his voice, even when dealing with difficult customers. That morning, a shadow fell across his table. Amir looked up to see Captain William Hart, a tall British officer in a neatly pressed khaki uniform, standing at the entrance. His boots shone like mirrors, his mustache trimmed with military precision. William was in his early 30s, new to Hindustan, and still adjusting to the heat. His skin flushed slightly under the sun, but his posture carried the unmistakable stiffness of a man trained to command. "Good morning," William said, though his tone sounded more like a statement than a greeting. "You make signs here?" "Yes, Sahib," Amir replied, rising respectfully. "Please come inside. What work do you require?" William stepped in, glancing around at the examples on the walls, shop boards with delicate floral patterns, gilded letters in both English and Urdu, bright festival banners rolled neatly in the corner. "I need a sign for the British Club," William said, taking off his gloves. It must read, "European Gentlemen's Recreation Hall." Large letters, in English only. "I want it finished in 5 days." Amir paused slightly at the short deadline, but kept his voice even. "Yes, Sahib. It can be done. May I know if you prefer plain lettering, or would you like a border design?" William gave a small frown, as though the question was unnecessary. "Plain. Clear. The sort of thing anyone can read from the street." He glanced again at Amir's work. "I've seen some signs here that are too decorated. Overdone. This must be proper." Amir nodded. "Understood, Sahib. I will ensure it is proper." The officer reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather notebook, jotting something down. "How much will it cost?" Amir gave the price, fair and reasonable, but William's brows rose slightly, his lips tightening. That seems high." "It is the price for good materials," Amir explained calmly. "The wood will be weatherproofed, the paint imported from Bombay. It will last many years." William said nothing for a moment, then gave a short nod. "Very well, but see that it is done on time." With that, he turned on his heel and left, his boots echoing down the street. Amir watched him go, then quietly returned to his work. That night, the story of the encounter traveled through the narrow lanes, carried on the lips of neighbors. In Hindustan, news did not always need paper to travel. It lived in whispers and tea-shop conversations. "A new officer in town," one man told another at the chai stall. "They say he's strict," said another, "and doesn't trust our people to work well." Amir heard these murmurs, but paid them no mind. In his view, one did his work with dignity, regardless of who the customer was. But still, He could not ignore the small sting in William's eyes, the way the man had looked at him not as an equal craftsman, but as someone to be managed and doubted. The next morning, as Amir prepared his wood for the sign, he remembered something his father had told him long ago, when he was a young apprentice. Beta, the measure of your worth is not in the coins people pay you, but in the way you treat them, even when they treat you poorly. Paint your letters straight, even if the eyes reading them are crooked. It was advice Amir carried with him always. In the marketplace that day, British soldiers passed in small groups, their voices loud and confident. They bought fruit without bargaining, ordered shopkeepers to fetch water, and sat on benches marked for Europeans only. This was normal life now. Some Hindustanis avoided looking directly at them. Others greeted them politely, hoping to stay out of trouble. But Amir kept his focus on his brush, tracing the bold lines of the first letter, E for European. As the black paint flowed across the smooth wood, he thought of how every letter he painted was a bridge between two worlds, one that ruled and one that endured. By evening, the board was halfway done. Just as Amir was packing his brushes, William returned. This time, he did not remove his gloves. He looked over the unfinished sign and said, "I hope this will be ready on time. We cannot have delays for such an important building." "It will be ready, Sahib," Amir replied patiently. William studied him for a moment, then gave a short nod and left without another word. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the last light of day caught the gold trim on the shop's existing boards, making them glow. Amir stood at the doorway, watching the British officer's figure fade into the crowd. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a quiet challenge had been set before him, not to prove his skill, but to see if patience could outlast prejudice. And so, in that small shop under the fading sky, the story began. Section 2. Tension and Humiliation. The morning sun poured over the bazaar, spilling golden light across the cobblestones. The market had already awakened. The clang of metal pans, the hiss of frying oil, the bleating of goats tied near the butcher's stall. Hawkers called out in sing-song tones, and somewhere a flute seller played a slow, haunting melody. Inside his shop, Amir was bent over the large wooden board for the British Club. The black English letters stood out boldly against the smooth, sanded wood. He had taken extra care to keep each stroke even, the curves of the letters clean. Around the edges, he had begun painting a faint gold border, subtle, not elaborate, but enough to give the sign dignity. Halfway through his work, the clop of boots approached again. Captain William Hart entered without waiting for an invitation. His eyes swept the shop. "You've done the lettering," William said, running a gloved hand over the board. "But what's this? A gold border?" "It is a simple finish, Sahib," Amir explained. "It will protect the edges from wear and give the board a complete look." William frowned slightly. "I told you plain. No unnecessary decorations." "It is not decoration, Sahib," Amir said gently. "It is a method to keep the paint from chipping." William's lips tightened. "Just keep it simple. And see that it's ready. We're not in need of artistic flourishes." He left as abruptly as he had entered. As the day went on, Amir noticed more of the quiet barriers that shaped their town. A new sign had been placed outside the public garden. For Europeans only. On the train platform, the benches were marked in chalk, some for Europeans, others for natives. In the post office, a Hindustani clerk was scolded loudly by a British officer for a delay in delivering his mail, even though the fault lay in the sorting room. These things had become so common that many locals walked past without a glance. But for Amir, each moment was a reminder of the distance between ruler and ruled. 2 days later, William returned again, this time with 2 other British officers. They wore spotless white shirts under their coats and spoke quickly to one another in English. "This is the fellow I told you about," William said to them, gesturing to Amir. "He's doing the sign for the club." One of the officers, a man with a red face and a booming laugh, stepped forward and looked at the sign. "Looks tidy enough," he said, before turning to William. "Let's hope it lasts longer than the one the last native made." The men chuckled. Amir continued, painting in silence. He understood every word, though he pretended not to. Later that evening, the incident became heavier in his mind. At home, Amir sat on a woven mat while his wife, Shabnam, served him a simple meal of lentils and bread. His two children, Zara and Imran, played in the corner with scraps of painted wood from the shop. Shabnam noticed his quietness. "What is troubling you?" she asked. "They think we cannot work as well as they do," Amir said. "Even when they come to us for our skills, they doubt us." Shabnam poured him tea. "Then let your work speak louder than their words. You were not raised to answer arrogance with anger." Amir gave a faint smile. "Sometimes I wonder if patience changes anything." Shabnam's eyes softened. "Perhaps it will not change the whole world. But it may change one man. And that may be enough." The next morning, just as Amir was finishing the final coat of paint, a British club messenger arrived. He carried a note from the secretary. The order for the sign had changed. The wording was to be slightly different. But there was a problem. The note made it seem as though the delay in completion was Amir's fault. That afternoon, William arrived at the shop with the club secretary in tow. Amir had not even spoken before William's voice rose in the narrow room. "This is unacceptable. You were told the wording from the start, and now there are changes because you could not get it right." Amir held the note out calmly. "Sahib, the changes were sent to me only this morning." William glanced at the note but waved it off. "The point is, this has caused inconvenience to the club. You must be quicker. This is not a leisurely craft. It's work for the administration." Outside, a few market vendors had gathered to watch. Their faces were unreadable, but Amir could feel their eyes on him. Being scolded publicly, especially by a British officer, was a humiliation that burned quietly inside. That evening, Amir closed his shop early. He walked slowly through the narrow lanes, past the sweet shop where children crowded around trays of jalebi, past the blacksmith hammering sparks from iron, past the steps of the mosque where the evening call to prayer echoed. He greeted his neighbors, his voice steady, but inside, he was heavy with thoughts. In his mind, he replayed the moment William had raised his voice. He wondered if all the patience in the world could soften such hardened pride. But then he remembered his father's words, "A bridge is not built in a day, but one stone at a time." And so, Amir told himself, perhaps this was one stone. In the British quarters that same night, William sat in the club's reading room, sipping tea. One of the officers who had visited Amir's shop with him leaned back in his chair. "You were rather hard on that sign-maker," the officer said casually. William shrugged. "If we don't keep them in line, they get lazy. It's how things are here." The officer laughed. "True enough. They're not like us." William said nothing, but somewhere in his mind, he remembered the quiet way Amir had taken his criticism, without argument, without resentment in his eyes. It puzzled him. He had expected anger or excuses, not calm dignity. That small thought lingered longer than he realized. Section 3. The Flood and the Rescue. The monsoon rains had been falling for 3 days without pause. At first, it was the kind of rain the people of Hindustan welcomed. Steady, refreshing, cooling the baked earth. But by the third night, the clouds had grown heavy and dark, and the rain no longer came in gentle sheets but in relentless torrents. The bazaar streets, once filled with the calls of vendors and the clinking of coins, were now rivers of muddy water. Stalls had been dismantled, goods piled high on wooden platforms to keep them dry. Chickens huddled under carts, and dogs darted from doorway to doorway in search of shelter. Inside his shop, Amir stood at the door, watching the rain lash the rooftops. His newly finished signboard for the British Club was propped carefully against the wall, safe from the damp. From somewhere down the street came the frantic ringing of a temple bell, not for worship, but as a warning. The small river beyond the town had overflowed. The lower streets were flooding fast. By midday, the water was knee-deep in some areas, and the current in the narrow alleys had grown strong enough to sweep away baskets and clay pots. People moved hurriedly, carrying children on their shoulders, pushing carts piled with belongings. The sound of rushing water was everywhere, mingled with the shouts of neighbors calling to one another. Word spread quickly through the bazaar. The British Club was in trouble. Its building, set slightly lower than the rest of the British quarters, was already taking on water. And worse, a child was trapped inside. Captain William Hart was there, standing in the flooded courtyard of the club, shouting orders to a handful of men. His usually neat uniform was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. "My nephew is inside," William barked, pointing toward the main hall. "The water's rising fast. We need that door open." But the large wooden door had swollen in the damp and was jammed shut. The windows were too high to reach without a ladder, and the men hesitated. The current in the courtyard was growing stronger by the minute, swirling around their knees. Amir had arrived with a group of townsfolk who had come to see the trouble. He could see the boy's small face in the window, pale and frightened. Without a moment's pause, he stepped forward. "I can open it," Amir called out. William turned sharply, startled to see him there. "It's dangerous," he said. "The current. Every moment you argue, Sahib, the water rises," Amir replied. His voice was steady, not defiant, but urgent. Without waiting for permission, Amir waded into the courtyard, the water cold and pushing hard against his legs. He carried a crowbar in one hand, the same tool he used to lift heavy boards in a shop. The current tugged at his clothes, nearly unbalancing him, but he pressed forward until he reached the door. He jammed the crowbar into the gap between the door and the frame, forcing it with all his strength. The wood groaned, the iron hinges straining. Behind the door, the boy was crying, his small fists pounding weakly. Amir pushed harder. His muscles burned. The crowbar slipped once, and his hand scraped against the swollen wood, leaving a deep cut. Still, he gritted his teeth and tried again. With a loud crack, the door gave way. Water surged out, nearly knocking Amir off his feet. But in the rush, he caught the boy's arm and pulled him close, lifting him into his arms. William was there in an instant, wading through the water to meet them. His eyes, usually cool and assessing, were wide with something else: relief, fear, gratitude, all tangled together. "You saved him," William said, his voice low and breathless. Amir said nothing, just handed the boy over. The cut on his arm was bleeding freely now, the rain washing the blood into the floodwater. The townsfolk, who had been watching from the edges of the courtyard, murmured quietly. Some nodded to one another. Even those who had doubted the worth of patience felt a shift in the air. With the British Club half submerged and the roads to the higher quarters blocked by water, William had little choice but to seek shelter elsewhere. Amir, still dripping from the rescue, spoke simply. "My home is near. Bring the boy there until the water lowers." William hesitated. For a British officer to take refuge in a Hindustani's home was not common. But with the storm still raging and the boy clinging to his neck, he nodded. Amir's home was small, with low ceilings and walls the color of sun-baked clay. Shabnam met them at the door, quickly ushering them inside. Zara and Imran, wide-eyed, peered from behind her. They gave William a towel and a set of dry clothes belonging to Amir's late brother, slightly worn but clean. Shabnam wrapped the boy in a quilt and placed him near the fire, where the smell of boiling lentils filled the room. William sat silently for a while, watching this family move around their modest home. He noticed how Amir's children offered the boy a sweet from their small tin without being asked. He saw how Shabnam poured tea for everyone, including him, without hesitation or formality. There was no bitterness here, no coldness, only quiet generosity. That night, the rain drummed steadily on the roof. William lay awake on the woven mat they had given him, listening to the muffled conversation between Amir and Shabnam in the next room. "They will leave when the road is clear," Shabnam said softly. "Yes," Amir replied. "And perhaps they will forget this by next week." "Perhaps," she said. "But perhaps not." William closed his eyes, the words lingering in his mind. When dawn came, the storm had finally weakened. The streets were still flooded, but the water was slowly receding. William stood in the doorway, looking out at the pale, washed-out light of morning. Amir was already outside, speaking to neighbors about clearing the debris. William turned to look at the boy, now smiling faintly as he ate bread with honey at the small table. He thought of the swollen door, the rushing water, the cut on Amir's arm, and how, despite every reason to walk away, the man had come forward without hesitation. Something in William's view of this land and its people had shifted. Not completely, but enough to make him question the way he had been taught to see. Section 4. The Winds of Change and the Moral Resolution. Purpose of this section: to conclude the story with a transformative resolution that highlights the moral lesson. This section should show the gradual changes in the treatment of Hindustani people, the seeds of resistance, and the emergence of mutual understanding in isolated cases. It should also close the narrative arc of the characters introduced earlier, showing how their struggles contribute to a larger historical shift. Detailed outline. 1. Opening, post-rebellion atmosphere. Begin with a reflective tone, describing the aftermath of a significant uprising, e.g., the revolt of 1857, that shook the British administration. Show both fear and grudging respect growing in the minds of some English officers after witnessing the courage and unity of Hindustanis. Streets are quieter, but whispers of change echo in the air. 2. The protagonist's journey forward. The main Hindustani protagonist, from earlier sections, has survived humiliation, injustice, and hardship. He now becomes more vocal in speaking against unfair treatment, inspiring others quietly through words, literature, or trade. Scenes show him advising young Hindustanis to learn English, not as submission, but as a tool to be heard in the oppressor's court. 3. Small acts of justice. Introduce an English officer who treats locals with fairness, perhaps because of a personal debt or moral awakening. Show a touching scene where the officer punishes a fellow Englishman for abusing a Hindustani servant. Locals begin to see faint signs that not every Englishman views them with disdain. 4. Growing resistance and self-respect. Depict the quiet rise of nationalist thought among educated Hindustanis. Include a scene where a small group discusses newspapers, pamphlets, and meetings aimed at gaining rights. The protagonist realizes that true change will come not just from fighting but from education, unity, and persistence. Show cultural pride returning. People start wearing traditional clothes with pride, speaking their languages openly again. 5. Final moral turn. End with a hopeful scene. A child of mixed Anglo-Indian heritage plays with Hindustani children in the street. An old English officer watches and smiles, thinking perhaps this generation will not carry the same prejudices. The protagonist walks away, feeling that while his own wounds may never fully heal, he has lived to see the first light of a better dawn. Key moral message: respect, dignity, and equality are the foundations of humanity. Oppression may endure for years, but truth, unity, and education eventually plant seeds that break the hardest chains.